Welcome to an in-depth guide for the Reaper job in Final Fantasy XIV's Dawntrail expansion. This video will include everything you need to know to play this job optimally, from the very basics of the job to more advanced concepts and things to look out for that will help you face any kind of encounter that you desire, including certain tips that will allow you to get those big juicy numbers when fighting enemies. So no matter if you're completely new to the job or you're looking to delve deeper into the intricacies of the class to face bigger challenges, this guide has you covered. For your ease of view, this video has been made with timestamps in mind that you can see right now on screen, so feel free to pause the video right here and go to the menu that has the information that you desire. Now, without further ado, let's get right into it, shall we? So, the Reaper job's whole identity, in case it wasn't obvious already, revolves around the fact of being able to command your demon and eventually become him, with flashy and fast animations and a really generous barrier of entry level that is quite accessible but also harder to master once you delve deeper into the job, as we will see later. One thing you also need to keep in mind though is that despite its long and potent buff windows, Reaper is quite more flexible and adaptable than other jobs thanks to the tools you have at your disposal. On the other hand though, this job also gets heavily punished in battles with any kind of downtime that can misalign the skills you use, although, as we will see, this will happen naturally one way or another. Reaper is also categorized as a buffer job, and while we surely do have a party-wide buff, that skill is a bit different than any other buffs other jobs might have, giving us personal benefits besides the initial intended boost of damage. That makes Reaper feel more like a mix between a selfish DPS job and a buffer one, which if we're being honest, is quite a unique trait. Now, all of that is cool, but how do we actually play the job, right? Alright, so the first thing you need to understand is, while everything might look a bit confusing at first, Reaper is an extremely easy job to break down and understand. And all starts with this gauge. This is basically your best friend, and how you manage this gauge will determine how good you are with the job. But let's go step by step first. This gauge is composed of two different lines called Soul Gauge and Shroud Gauge that fill up from different sources. The red one is the very first one you unlock and will allow you to use demon-like abilities once you reach a minimum of 50 gauge. The way you fill it is by using the skills which only use your scythe as a weapon. These ones are your single target 1-2-3 combo, also called as Slice, Waxing Slice, and Infernal Slice, your AoE combo with Spinning Scythe and Nightmare Scythe, and your base range skills, which, thanks to Dawntrail changes, now also gives us some red gauge. These ones are Harpe and Harvest Moon, which you get by casting Soulso. A skill we will be going more in depth later, but just understand that it works this way for now. All of these skills we just mentioned will give you 10 gauge every time you press them, but bear in mind that if you press one of these buttons outside of a combo, other than the skill that starts it, you won't be getting any gauge from the ability, as well as way less potency from the attack itself, something we certainly don't want to happen. So make sure to not drop a combo when you start it if possible. Aside from these skills though, we also have two very important ones, which are Soul Slice and Soul Scythe. These two skills have basically the same usage, with the difference that one is a single target attack while the other one is AoE focused. They also both have a limited usage, with two charges that are shared between them and refresh over time, meaning that if you press one of them, the other one also loses a charge. The main reason for this limited usage is because, contrary to the other skills we have seen, these ones will give you 50 gauge after its usage, meaning we can use a demon skill instantly afterwards if we so desire. Alright, so now that we understand how to get the red gauge, let's take a look at the demon skills we're able to use once we accumulate enough of it. Once we have a minimum of 50 red gauge, these options will open to us: Bloodstalk, Unveiled Gibbet and Gallows, Grimswathe, and Gluttony. Again, this might sound like a lot, but same as before, it's actually way simpler than it looks. The first thing we need to understand is that all of these red demon skills we press are off GCDs, which are the skills we can press in between our GCDs to keep the damage going, instead of waiting for the skill timer to recharge like most of the skills in our kit. The ones we showed before are clear examples of that. Upon pressing these off GCDs, they will give us a soul that can be seen in our buff bar. These souls have a time window of usage and will unlock us multiple follow-up skills that are necessary to fill our blue gauge, which is the second line in our best friend. if it helps, you can also treat these skills as the final combination of your demon and scythe attacks. Now, let's break all of these down properly. Bloodstalk, Unveil Givet, and Unveil Gallows are the single target skills available with your demon, and while they look like different skills with different names and icons, they are basically the same button. What you need to understand here is that Bloodstalk is the initial icon you will see on the skill button, and this one will start a combo that will let you choose between two options, Givet or Gallows, the blue skills that deal a lot of damage. These two will do basically the same with the small difference that Givet has a positional on the flank of the enemy, while Gallows has it on the rear, so just make sure to hit those to deal extra damage. Now, upon pressing either of those skills, you will get a new buff. This buff basically means that the next Givet or Gallows, the opposite of the one you have just used, will get an extra potency buff that lasts for 60 seconds, on top of the positional buff that we just talked about, of course. Once you have that, you will see that Bloodstalk's icon will have changed to either Unveil Givet or Gallows, again, depending on the button you haven't pressed before. And at this point, it's just a matter of pressing the glowy button you haven't used before until you either lose uptime for more than 60 seconds, which pretty much only happens in ultimates, or you simply die and need to start the whole process again. Now, I know this might sound like a lot of information and it can seem very complex, but in reality is that in casual content and even any content outside ultimates, you will probably forget that this buff even exists. So just don't worry, simply press what glows and make sure to use the souls, aka blue skills, once they are lit up and you will be good to go. If you are facing harder content, of course, then make sure to keep an eye on that just in case it falls off. Moving on, we got our only AoE demon skill called Grimswathe, which upon pressing it, it gives us the option to use Guillotine, a follow-up AoE skill. Sadly, there's no more secrets to this, so let's just move on. Lastly, we got one of the most powerful and important skills in our whole kit, and one that will probably give you a fair amount of headaches, Gluttony. This skill is used both for single target and AoE scenarios, dealing full damage to the target it hits and 25% less to the remaining enemies next to it. Gluttony also has a recast time of 60 seconds, and the reason for that is not only due to the increased potency it has compared to the other options available, but also because instead of giving you one soul, it gives us two, allowing us to use Givet and Gallows together, or two uses of Guillotine if we are facing multiple enemies. So basically just giving us one extra usage of a soul compared to the options mentioned before. Once you get to level 96 though, as you probably should be if you're watching this video, Gluttony becomes even more powerful, giving us upon pressing a better and more potent version of Givet, Gallows, and Guillotine, which will change to Executioner's Givet, Gallows, and Guillotine, while also changing their icon color to green, which makes it very confusing since they still give us blue gauge, but they are green now, so we will still refer to them as blue, okay? Alright? Cool. Now, before moving on, I want you to burn this into your mind since it's one of the most common mistakes a beginner can and will make, trust me. Upon pressing one of these red skills here, you will only be able to press these follow-up blue skills. If you press anything else than one of these skills, you will lose up the soul given to you, and thus the chance to press any of the blue skills, making you lose tons of damage, not being able to transform later on, and most importantly, leaving you with the urge to slap yourself on the face and wishing you were playing a league game to be able to say FF, go next. So I hope you now understand why Gluttony will give you so many headaches, because you will be misclicking that a lot, trust me, it happens to the best of us. So always remember, red and then blue, or I guess green if you're pressing Gluttony, I don't know. Whatever the case, now that we understand that, let's move on to the blue line that we have been filling with the blue skills. When reaching 50 gauge, we are given the option to finally become our demon with Enshroud, our signature skill for the job. Upon transforming, we get a completely new gauge and set of skills. These skills are Void Reaping, Cross Reaping, Grim Reaping, Lemur Slice, Lemur Scythe, Communio, and Sacrificium. Once again, this might sound like a lot, but it's actually extremely easy and straightforward, so let's break it down. Void Reaping and Cross Reaping work exactly the same way as Givet and Gallows. When you transform, you will be able to start your combo with one of them, and upon pressing one, the other one gets buffed and so on. Grim Reaping is your AoE skill, Lemur Slice and Lemur Scythe are your single target and AoE of GCDs respectively, Sacrificium is a free and powerful off GCD you get upon transformation that has both single target and AoE potential, same as Gluttony, and Communio is the very last skill you always press in your Enshroud combo, being extremely powerful. Now, when transforming, you won't be able to use all of that at first, and that is because of these orbs you can find in the unique gauge this enshrouded form has. These blue orbs represent the amount of GCDs we can press during this Enshroud window, which, as you can see, it's 5 usages. But there is one more thing going on though. Upon pressing a GCD, we will notice the orb doesn't really disappear, but changes to a purple color instead. These purple colored orbs represent the ability to use the off-GCD skills Lemur Slice and Lemur Scythe, which upon usage will make the orb finally vanish. These off-GCD skills are only available to use once you accumulate 2 purple orbs though, with Sacrificium being a completely different case which can be used whenever we desire. Knowing this, the Enshroud rotation is simplified and becomes something super straightforward as we already mentioned. In-game, this process would look like this. You start by choosing either Void Reaping or Cross Reaping. For ease of understanding, we will choose Void Reaping as our first option here. This is followed up by Sacrificium, which can be fit in between any GCDs, but I recommend you get used to use it here for now. Afterwards, we will press the opposite GCD we didn't press before, Cross Reaping, and proceed by pressing Lemur Slice and consume the first 2 purple orbs we got after using 2 GCDs. From here on, we just repeat what we did until only 1 orb is left in our gauge, which we will use to finish up with Communio. The AoE rotation follows up the same principle, but it's even easier than the single target one. In this case, it will look like this. One last thing you need to bear in mind is that when you are enshrouded, all other skills you had in the human form, so to speak, get locked except for 4. 2 of these we will go into more detail now, while the remaining 2 are Harpe and Harvest Moon, a skill given by the cast of Soulso. These skills can be used and will be used in one way or another, as we will see when we get into the burst window section of the video. Now, we have seen how Reaper works, but we are missing one last section before moving on, and that is the multiple buffs we got. These ones are Arcane Circle, our 2 minutes raid-wide skill that buffs the potency of us and our allies by 3%. The key difference between this buff and other jobs buffs is the fact that while Arcane Circle is activated, a second personal buff will be placed on us. This buff will gather stacks from the attacks our allies do on the enemies, and after a few seconds, a secondary skill called Plentiful Harvest will light up, dealing lots of damage, and most importantly, giving us a free usage of Enshroud. Bear in mind, this free usage won't consume any blue gauge, and instead will be shown as a buff lasting 30 seconds. If you don't use Enshroud during that time, you lose it. Also know that every time you use Enshroud through Plentiful Harvest, upon using Communio, that skill will be replaced with Perfectio, a very powerful ranged attack that also has a 30 seconds window time of usage, and we must use since it's the strongest attack we have in our whole kit. Remember though, you only get that through the Enshroud given by Plentiful Harvest usage, so make sure to use it. Arcane Crest is another tool we have at our disposal, and while it's not really a buff, it does provide a 10% mitigation shield that lasts for 5 seconds. When taking enough damage, the shield will break and give a party AoE regen spell that will cure the whole party for a few seconds. Lastly, and most importantly, we got Shadow of Death and World of Death. These 2 skills do basically the same, with the only difference being one being single target and the other one being AoE based. These are also one of the most important tools you have available, if not the most important, and that's because when pressed, they cast a debuff on the enemy called Death's Design, giving you a 10% damage increase when hitting that enemy and lasting for 30 seconds, a duration that can be extended up to 60. This is extremely important to keep up at all times, meaning every fight will start with this button and you will have to keep an eye on it so it never falls off. Letting this debuff drop for a prolonged amount of time will cause a major damage loss, and you certainly don't want that to happen. And with that, we have seen everything Reaper has to offer to us at a basic level. To summarize it, remember, we open with Shadow of Death always, then we use our Scythe combos and our Soul Slice charges to gather red gauge. Remember to never overcap your gauge though. Once we got enough, we use our red skills or demon skills, which will allow us to use our blue skills. These ones will fill our blue gauge, which in return will allow us to transform into our demon through Enshroud once we have enough gauge. Also remember to use Arcane Circle to buff your team and get a free Enshroud through Plentiful Harvest. From now on, we will proceed with more advanced concepts, so I recommend you to practice everything explained here with a dummy and get a feeling of the basics of the job by yourself before stepping any further. Once you feel like you are ready, I invite you to follow along. So, before we get into rotations, I want to make sure to point out the most important skills you should be keeping an eye out for while playing this job, and the ones you will have to manage the most during your rotation. These skills are Shadow of Death, which as we already said, is extremely important to apply and reapply on the enemy before pressing any other skill, so you never lose that 10% damage increase when attacking. Soul Slice, which we never want it to be capped at 2 charges. Always make sure the GCD is rolling and avoid having more than 1 charge stacked to maximize the usage of the skill. Also remember to not overcap your red gauge with it. Gluttony is a skill you always want to press right when it comes off cooldown. Not pressing it will cause the skill to drift away on our rotation and potentially losing a usage in the future if it keeps happening. Being such a powerful skill, we want to avoid that as much as possible. Arcane Circle is our raid buff, and same as any other raid buffs, we want to press it right when it comes off cooldown to align it with everybody else's. Plentiful Harvest is the skill we will get a few seconds after using Arcane Circle. It's very important we use it so we get the free usage of Enshroud that comes with it. Enshroud is an obvious pick and a hard skill to miss. Still, it is one you will have to manage while playing Reaper and one you won't be always pressing immediately every time you get it. Perfectio is the extremely powerful range skill you get after finishing your free Enshroud given by Plentiful Harvest with Communio. This skill will replace Communio after it's cast and have a 30 seconds window of usage. Lots of times you will use it instantly, but others you won't. We will look deeper into this later. And Harvest Moon is the powerful range skill you get after casting Soul Soak. You only get 1 usage in most battles, so how you manage it is also very important. We will also look deeper into this later. These are the most important skills in your kit. How you manage them next with your gauge will determine how well you perform with the job compared to other people, so make sure to pay attention to them. Now that we have our eyes on those, we can move into the actual usage of our kit in our rotation, starting with our opener. We will start our opener by pre-pulling with Harpe at around 1.7 or 1.8 seconds left. Basically, to make it easier, when you see 2 seconds left on your screen, wait 1 split second and start casting the skill. Afterwards, you will either dash or walk towards the boss, up to choice depending on the battle, and apply the 10% damage buff on the enemy with Shadow of Death. Then, we use our first Soul Slice to start making the GCD roll and proceed to press our raid buff Arcane Circle, which we use here to sync with everyone else's buffs together with Gluttony right after. We then use Executioner's Gift and Gallows thanks to the 2 souls given by Gluttony, making sure to hit our positionals of course. After these 2 GCDs, Plentiful Harvest will have had enough time to gather enough stacks for its usage, which we will press to get our free Enshroud that we will immediately use upon getting it. After this, we will do our usual Enshroud rotation with Void Reaping, Sacrificium, then Cross Reaping, Lemur Slice, into another Void Reaping and Cross Reaping, with a second Lemur Slice that will finish with Communio. Then, we will use Perfectio right after and follow up with our remaining charge of Soul Slice, which will allow us to instantly use Einbell Givet in this case, since we chose Executioner's Givet as our first option before with Gluttony, and follow with the usage of Givet. From here on, we reapply Shadow of Death so it doesn't fall off, and we proceed with our filler 1-2-3 rotation, marking the end of our opener. Bear in mind that if you need to use a potion, you will use it after our first Shadow of Death. In-game, this process would look like this. Now, before moving on to the reopeners, we need to look at the rotation that happens during our odd minute window, also known as 1 minute. That window is the time in between our opener and every reopener after it, which is marked by the return of cooldown of our 2-minute raid buffs. This part of the rotation is extremely simple, and it's marked by the build-up of our Enshroud gauge, while at the same time we don't overcap our Soul Slice charges, keep our Shadow of Death buff up, and we make sure to use Gluttony right when it comes off cooldown. After using the 1 minute Enshroud, we will start building up our next Enshroud for the reopener window that is to come at the 2-minute mark. In game, it will look like this. At this point we need to make a little note though. Here we just got our 1 minute Enshroud ready to use, but before using it, you must consider something first. If we press this instantly, we will have around 17 seconds left for our Gluttony to come back off cooldown. If we decide to use Enshroud here, fitting the whole burst that comes with it and getting the resources necessary to use Gluttony immediately is quite tight, although doable. The problem here is that if you have even the slightest downtime after finishing your opener, this window can become even more tight, making the possibility of delaying the use of Gluttony due to the use of Enshroud very high. Since that is something we definitely don't want to do, as we clarified before, the rule of thumb to follow is to save this Enshroud usage for after we use Gluttony. That way, we make sure to press everything when we have to and we lose no damage at all. With that, let's move on to the reopeners, which we have two options to use here. The first one is the double Enshroud window. This opener is the standard one, and the one you should and will be using 99% of the time. We will start by using Enshroud when there is around 6 seconds left for our raid buff. Afterwards, we will Shadow of Death into Void Reaping into a second Shadow of Death, which will be followed by pressing our raid buff together with our potion if we need to use that. From now on, we follow with our whole remaining Enshroud combo, followed up by a second Enshroud thanks to the immediate usage of Plentiful Harvest after casting our first Communio. This is also followed by the usage of Perfectio and Soul Slice, which will allow us to use Gluttony and the following souls it gives us. In the case you find yourself with 50 or more gauge upon reaching this part though, you can simply use Gluttony right after Perfectio and leave Soul Slice for the very last. Now, upon seeing this, you might ask yourself, and rightfully so, why aren't we using Gluttony right when it comes off cooldown at the start of our burst window? And that is because doing a double Enshroud during this window provides more damage than using Gluttony right off cooldown and only using one Enshroud afterwards, making this the one and only exception where we delay this skill. Also bear in mind, we are using these two Shadow of Death here, not only to make sure our buff is up for our whole burst window, but also to make time for our Enshroud to be ready again for our second usage after pressing Plentiful Harvest. You should be getting into your burst window with 2 or 1 seconds left on Death's Design, so make sure to not reapply the buff when you are getting close to this moment and press any other GCD that deals more damage, leaving the reapplyment for once you start your burst window. This is our standard 2-minute double Enshroud burst window at a basic level. but there is an extra layer that is extremely important we understand to maximize our damage throughout the encounters. If you have paid close attention, you will have realized that the usage of Sacrificium during the first Enshroud is used as our second off GCD instead of our first as usual. That is because, since this is our most powerful off GCD, we want to make sure it gets inside everyone else's raid buffs, not only yours, in case they take a second or two more to press them. Of course, this is out of your control, but at least we try our best to make everything work properly. Now, this is the most important and potentially confusing part. How you get into your burst window will determine how you end it, changing the order. This process is marked by your 1-2-3 combo and at what point you find yourself in it when starting your 2-minute window. The example we have seen is the most ideal instance you can get since you are getting into your burst window with your 1-2-3 combo finished thanks to Infernal Slice. But let's change the example. Let's say that before starting your burst window with Enshroud, the last button you have pressed is either Slice or Waxing Slice. That would mean our combo isn't finished, giving us 30 seconds before the combo falls off and we'll lose the damage given by these two skills. So how do we fix this? Well, that's pretty simple. The way to fix it, and make sure we don't lose the potency from them, is by changing the end of our burst window right after we finish our second Enshroud. This would add the combo skill we require to press right after Communio, and then you would proceed as normal with Perfectio and everything that comes after. Now, seeing this, you might also ask yourself, if Perfectio is our most powerful skill, wouldn't it be a damage loss to move it outside the raid buffs? And the answer to that is not at all really. Putting Perfectio into buffs might be a damage gain at the moment, but losing the damage of Waxing Slice together with Infernal Slice, it's a way bigger damage loss on the long run, especially if this loss keeps stacking every time we do our burst window. If we look at the potency of both of those skills, the first one is 500 potency, while the second one is 600. That means that in the best case scenario we're losing 600 potency every time we drop our combo, while in the worst one, we're losing up to 1100. That is almost the same damage that Perfectio does with its 1300 potency. So potentially dropping up to 1100 potency every time we do our reopener just to gain a small 39 extra potency by putting Perfectio into raid buffs is definitely not a good trade at all. On top of that, we are losing 10 red gauge every time we don't press those skills, leading to potentially losing an extra Give It or Gallows that can also allow us to potentially Enshroud once more in the future. So definitely, this is something we don't want to let slide. This wasn't that bad after all, right? But there is something else that can happen in these situations. As I already told you, after using your Perfectio, there is a chance you can instantly cast Gluttony if you have enough red gauge coming into your burst window, leaving the use of Soul Slice for after you finish with Give It and Gallows. If that is the case we find ourselves in and proceed with the rotation on screen, we will find that our Soul Slice charge comes back exactly when we are pressing our Gluttony combo, making the charges reach their cap of 2 for at least a whole GCD, which for Reaper equals to 2.5 seconds. This on itself can seem like a small problem if it only happens once, but if this happens multiple times during the fight, those 2.5 seconds keep multiplying until we eventually can cause the loss of a Soul Slice way down in the battle, something we of course don't want to happen. Now, if you go and test this on a dummy, you will realize no such thing happens. You have enough time to press everything just normally. But one thing we need to take into account is that the actual encounters you will be doing won't have static enemies that will stand still letting you hit them for free. Downtime is something that every fight has in some shape or form, making you adjust your rotation according to the situation you find yourself in. This downtime is especially bad for Reaper for reasons we will see in a bit, but ones that you can already start seeing here. So, how do we fix this then? Very simple again. Since Perfectio is already out of raid buffs, instead of using it right after doing our base combo follow-up, we will use Gluttony instead, advancing its use by 1 GCD. That will allow us to press Soul Slice after finishing with Give It and Gallows right before it reaches its cap. Where you place your Perfectio after that doesn't matter as long as you use it, just make sure to use it of course. Especially if you're inside your pot window buff, which will still be running after you are done with your burst window for around 10 seconds. Before moving on, there is just one last possibility that you might encounter in more advanced encounters like M4S or any ultimate. In the case of certain transitions, your party might want to use their raid buffs straight away when the boss is targetable again. In those cases, you won't be able to do the start of your opener properly, but don't worry, the solution is very simple. You simply Enshroud beforehand while you wait for the boss to come back, giving the skill enough time to come off cooldown for our second use. Once the boss is targetable again, you apply Death's Design and instantly use your buff. From then on, your rotation is the same, except for the fact that you need to reapply Death's Design earlier than usual, right before your use of Gluttony ideally. This example would look somewhat like this in an actual encounter with an enemy, but remember that the adjustments you might need to make for this window might vary depending on the situation you find yourself in. This about covers our double Enshroud burst window and all of its possibilities, but we still have one more burst window variant that you will find very familiar, the single Enshroud window. This burst window is basically a copy-paste from our opener with some very small changes. The first change is that we can use Shadow of Death way before than with our opener or the double Enshroud burst window, since we don't have to make time for our plentiful harvest to charge. Yearly Gluttony usage has us covered for that. The second thing to look out for is where we use the remaining Enshroud that we won't be using during the burst window. That is completely up to the player and the situation they find themselves in. You can save it for after you are done with the burst window, but you can also use it before you start it if the opportunity arises. Just make sure that if you choose the second option to use it earlier, you don't Enshroud when there is 13 seconds or less remaining for Gluttony. This reopener wasn't really viable during Endwalker, but thanks to the changes on Gluttony, the potency difference between both burst windows isn't as big as it used to be. This also makes this burst window a good option for people who just want to take the job at a more casual level, but still want to do a good job while playing in the class, giving good results with ease of execution. Other than that, you will rarely be using this reopener since the double Enshroud option is just better overall. Still, you might find moments where you will be forced to use this option due to not having enough time to fit our whole double Enshroud rotation into the small window given to us. A clear example are the level 90 ultimates, which, due to the gear and level increase we have coming from Endwalker patches and Dawntrail, the DPS checks are almost non-existent, making the possibility of fitting 2 Enshrouds at certain spots of the fight pretty much impossible. Of course, there are more variables at play when it comes to openers and reopeners depending on the fight, especially when it comes to ultimate fights and the messy rotations you end up having to figure out due to the constant downtime these fights present, with the most recent one having a completely different opener option that it looks like this. Now, I won't explain here the reason behind this one, but the point here is that these fights are more advanced, and if you want to get into them and need some help figuring stuff out, I recommend joining the Balance Discord server and look at the information posted there, as well as ask for any kind of help to the people in there. The link will be in the description. Now, before moving on, there is something very important we need to talk about that is intricately linked to our whole rotation, and that is the natural drifting of our skills and how downtime affects it. As I already mentioned before, downtime isn't very kind to this job, not only because we might cap on Soul's life stacks or the fact we need to manually reapply Death's Design before using anything else, but also because it makes important skills like Gluttony possibly drift further away than we want, or make the use of Enshroud a problem due to not gathering enough blue gauge for its ideal time of usage. How we adapt to these problems and manage our resources to be as optimal as possible is a core part of this job, but one thing we need to understand first is that this drifting happens naturally in our rotation, no matter if there's a lot of downtime in a battle or not. So let's take a look at what I mean. Putting ourselves in an ideal position where we have full uptime thanks to a dummy, we will start looking at our 1 minute Enshroud right after our opener finishes. Here, we are gathering blue gauge to use our transformation in our first odd minute window. If we pay attention, the moment we're able to use Enshroud, we have around 77 seconds left for our arcane circle. It doesn't mean we're going to use it now, since we have Gluttony coming, but we have the option. Now, if we fast forward 2 minutes at our next odd minute Enshroud, right after our burst window, which should be at the 3 minutes mark here, we will see that instead of having 77 seconds left on our buff, we actually have around 70 when we get our Enshroud ready. This gap will only increase at the 5 minute mark with 64 seconds left, and it will continue increasing the more the fight continues, until we reach a point where this drifting will affect our double Enshroud window if we let it be, due to not having enough time to fill our blue gauge for our reopener first Enshroud cast. Now, in this ideal scenario with the dummy, it's not only until our 7 minute odd window where we actually need to take action and not use the Enshroud available to us so we can have it in time for our 8 minute burst window, or if you prefer to call it that way, our fourth 2 minute buff window. The thing here is that, as I said before, encounters with enemies aren't as static as a dummy is, and some sort of smaller or bigger downtime is bound to affect us, making us adapt and adjust our rotation to the situation at hand. So then, how do we know when to save our 1 minute Enshroud or not? Well, that is through a very simple rule of thumb. If we have around 60 seconds or less left on our Arcane Circle buff at the moment we get, not use, but when we get our Enshroud available for its usage, then we will refrain from activating it and we will save it for our upcoming 2 minute burst window instead, giving us an extra Enshroud usage for after the burst window finishes. If we don't do that, you will find yourself with no time to fill your gauge before you need to enter your burst window, delaying the whole process by a few seconds when we absolutely don't want to do that. You also need to bear in mind something else though. In the case that you have more than 60 seconds remaining on your buff, you also need to think if there's gonna be enough downtime in between those 60 plus seconds preventing you from getting your gauge back during that time frame. If that is the case, no matter if you have 80 seconds left, you are gonna encounter the same problem once entering your burst window. Knowing when to use and adjust our Enshroud or not varies depending on the encounter, but the process for adjusting remains the same. Now, Enshroud isn't the only skill that can drift. As we have already seen, downtime can even affect our burst windows, changing the order of how they start and how they end. The multiple endings to our double Enshroud combo is the clear example, but that can even happen with our single Enshroud window if, for whatever reason, you decide to permanently keep using that option throughout the whole fight, swapping Arcane Circle with Soul Slice at the 6 minute mark. Whatever the case, the whole point with this is that how well you manage your resources and adjust to the multiple scenarios will determine how good you perform with this job. So always keep an eye out on your skills and gauge, and plan your rotation according to the fight. This will make the difference between a decent Reaper player and a good one. The last skills we need to delve a bit deeper are our range ones and how we properly use them. We will start with Perfectio, which is our most powerful skill in the job. As we have seen in our burst windows, we usually use Perfectio during our 2 minutes or our opener, but there is another possibility open to us. Being a range skill and having a 30 seconds window of usage, we can deliberately save its use if we know that soon after, we will have a moment of downtime where we won't be able to normally attack. A clear example is at the start of M3S, where I purposely don't use it on my openers so I can use it a few seconds later when I need to go away from the boss, and thus keeping the uptime with high DPS. This comes extremely handy due to the limited usage of Harvest Moon, which, talking about it, Harvest Moon is the skill we get by casting Soul Soul before pulling. This is the third highest hitting skill we have behind Perfectio and Communio, and it has an extremely limited usage due to the fact that casting Soul Soul during an encounter won't be immediate, and will take 3 whole seconds to cast. Due to that, most of the times you will only get one use throughout the whole fight, and dying during the encounter will make you lose its usage, making the skill quite unforgiving. In case a fight has some sort of transition or any kind of downtime longer than 3 seconds, then the possibility of recasting Soul Soul during the encounter is possible. Clear examples are the recent M4S transition or literally any ultimate fight due to their length. Also remember, this skill will always be safe to use for downtime moments where you cannot otherwise attack, same as the Perfectio example I have shown, or in moments of your rotation where you know you will be able to cast it back soon after. In case no downtime moments are presented or you don't need its usage there, feel free to use it anywhere else. You should always aim to press this skill at least once per battle. Not using it will transfer into a damage loss. But there is also another possibility though. There will be times where you will be forced to use a Shadow of Death close to your reopener, making you enter your burst window with way more seconds than we want to remaining on Death's design, instead of the 1 or 2 seconds mentioned before. In those cases, we can swap the second Shadow of Death with Harvest Moon as long as we're able to recast it soon after. This is why this is very situational. This pretty much only happens in certain ultimate fights, so if you're not able to get another use after that, it's better to save Harvest Moon for downtime moments and simply overcap your Death's design buff. For dungeons, feel free to use it for every pool of mobs and recast it in between them. Finally, we have Harpe, which is our base range skill and our very last option in case the aforementioned skills aren't available. Dashing in or out with Hell's Ingress and Hell's Regress will give us an insta-cast for Harpe, which comes in very handy in case we find ourselves in such a situation after using a dash. So, before wrapping up the video, I want to briefly talk about a few things. First thing we need to talk about is the limit break usage. This will be a bit longer and more complex than it should be for any other job, but sadly, not for this one. So, we all know how cool and flashy and nice limit breaks look and feel to use, giving us a big burst of damage that can help us clear more easily. When we look at it that way, limit breaking pretty much only gives us gains with no losses. That is, if you're not playing a job like Reaper. In that case, you probably want to think more carefully if you want to use it or not. However, before going any deeper into this, I want to emphasize something first. If you are only doing content with a casual or midcore mindset, then you shouldn't be too concerned about the stuff we will be talking about here. Feel free to use the limit break anywhere you want and display that cool animation that comes with it whenever you like. On the other hand though, if you're looking to optimize your damage to perform at your best in content that requires that kind of performance, mainly first weeks of Savage or certain ultimates, or you are simply interested in the topic, then feel free to follow along. So, why am I making this sound like limit breaking with Reaper is so bad? Well, if we look at the priority list for limit break, Reaper finds itself at the very bottom of that list, and it all comes down to topics we have already talked about. Downtime is really not kind to this job, making us lose gauge and cause delays that can make us miss important resources later on, like an extra Shroud or a use of Gluttony in the worst possible case. So what is limit breaking if not downtime that we force upon ourselves to deal that extra bit of damage to help us with the clear, right? Of course, as I already said, when we put it that way, it doesn't sound so bad, at least at the moment of usage, until later on, we realize that we have lost the usage of big burst tools that would have helped you even further with the clear if the other melee used it instead. Limit breaking has an animation lock of around 8 or 9 seconds between cast and the action finishing, which translates into the loss of 30 to 40 red gauge, which causes the very high chance of losing a Givet or Gallows usage, which can also cause the loss of an Enshroud if worse comes to worse. That without putting delays and skill drifting into consideration, which magnifies the possible loss even further. Now, for as catastrophic as I might be making this sound for Reaper, limit breaking is still an option for us, but we need to consider a few things first. First thing is what job is your co-melee playing. If they are playing a job like Monk, Raccoon or Ninja, then they will most certainly be using limit break instead of you. In the case you end up paired with a Samurai or Piper, then that's when you might need to talk things over and consider the other points I'll be talking about. They should probably still be using limit break instead of you, since they don't lose anything compared to what Reaper might lose, but depending on the situation or fight, you might need to consider using it instead. Second thing is your clear speed, and why is that important you might ask? Well, that's because of the third point. Depending on your clear time, you will find yourself with more or less resources at the time of deciding to use limit break or not. So let me put you an example. Let's say you find yourself at the end of the fight and after finishing your 2-minute burst window, you are presented with the option of limit breaking. But after finishing with your Gluttony, you see that you will have a third Enshroud usage very soon, or you already have it after saving it from your odd minute window. In that case, you should never be using limit break, because the burst damage that you will provide in that scenario will always be higher than any filler combo other jobs might have. On the other hand, if you have nothing left and you are just using filler skills, then you can freely use limit break and let the Samurai or Piper deal more damage than you with their filler. Now, all of this was mainly talking about the case you need to use limit break at the end of the fight, which is the most common thing. But what if we are forced to use it in the middle of the fight? In that case, the same 3 points from before still apply, but of course, predicting how your rotation will end up being at the end of the fight due to using limit break earlier is something impossible to know unless you have seen and optimized the full fight all the way through. So how do we know then when to use it or not? Well, the simple answer is just don't. But of course, things cannot be that simple. The reality is that using it in the middle of the fight is a gamble which you don't know the outcome of. If you come out losing, which you always do, mind you, but in a more or lesser way, then you are griefing yourself but also your team. Only thing is, they don't realize it and will only cry at the fact that you wiped at 0.1% enrage. So, if you can talk with your team and avoid such situations, then all the better for everyone. But an even bigger reality is that we cannot really control people or pretend that they understand when they don't, especially if you go into Party Finder. The moments when you will find this limit break usage useful are extremely rare, only in week 1 or week 2 of Savage content before you can get any gear, and certain specific ultimates like Shroud, which also happens to have a different prio system if I'm not mistaken. So, knowing this, we can also make a counter argument. These fights are not designed in a way that requires you to play pixel perfect or make a super optimal rotation to clear them. Week 1 clears are always messy. Optimizing and the chase of bigger numbers comes after if you so want to. So why not simply take the L and use the limit break if you are forced to, if that means getting that clear anyways. Same applies to ultimates. A clear is a clear, and wasting 20 minutes of everyone's time because someone decided to greed is not gonna help anyone, so just take the L. If you're not clearing because you are missing some skills at the very end of the fight after using limit break, then the problem doesn't really reside there. Bigger numbers do not always equal to a better player. Of course, all that I said here for both cases of usage is with the idea that everyone is equal in skill level and gear equipment. If someone has a dance partner, more gear than you, or is simply a way better player, then the limit break usage should be used by the player bringing way less overall damage unless discussed otherwise. If you are facing enrage problems and you are clearly bringing tons of damage and you know for certain that using limit break is making you lose potency, then you should talk with your group about that, since it's not about greeding but actually clearing. If you are still facing problems after that, you should probably just leave the group. So, in summary, as Reaper, you want to avoid limit breaking as much as possible. In the case that you might be forced to, always follow the 3 points mentioned before. After you get enough gear though, the necessity of using limit break should be removed completely. The second thing I wanted to talk about is the stats you want to prioritize when melding your gear with Materia. This will vary depending on the content you are doing. For most ultimates, there usually is a certain BIS, which stands for best in slot or the best gear you can get, in case you don't know. While for everything else, the BIS is the gear that comes out with the Savage tier. If you are planning on doing that kind of content, I recommend you again to check out the Balanced Discord server, where they have everything you need to get you ready. For everyone else who just want to do casual content or extremes at most, the rule of thumb to go by is as follows. Crit is your most important stat, then determination, followed really close by direct hit rate. Now, the third and last thing I wanted to touch on is a small tip for your skills placements on your HUD. And look, I won't be the one to tell you where to put your skills, that is completely up to you and your own preference, but since Reaper is quite a fast job to play with, especially when transforming, I at least recommend that you put all the demon skills, and especially the Enshroud skills, in keybinds that are easy to access and comfy for you. In my case, those buttons are 1 through 5, but for you, they can be the ones that you desire the most. With all of this, we've reached the end of the video. You should be now ready to face any kind of content the game throws at you while playing Reaper at an optimal level. I hope you have learned everything you were looking for and even some extra stuff that might help you in your learning process. If you think anything was missing or you have any kind of questions, please feel free to drop a comment down below. And if you found this guide helpful, please consider supporting this content by dropping a like. These kind of videos really take a long time to make, and any kind of support is really appreciated. With this, I bid you farewell and I'll see you on the next one.